This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
A note before we start. This episode contains mentions of suicide. Listener discretion is advised. And if help is needed, Lifeline is available on 13 11 14.
It's kind of like when you're that age, you know, you've got a picture in your mind about what your future's going to look like. And I was certainly the same. I knew what I was going to do for work. I knew what I was going to do for sport and recreation. I knew what sort of car I was going to have. I knew where I was going to meet my future wife and where I was going to live. Like it was all really clear in my mind. And then when you have that spinal injury, it's kind of like someone's stolen your future. Someone's taken away your vision, I guess, and it's really hard to see yourself doing anything.
I'm Georgia, and welcome to Season 3 of Finding Hope, the podcast that finds the good in the midst of the bad. Each episode, we meet someone who's had a bit of a hard time but has found hope and healing along the way. And hopefully they inspire you to embrace the good in your world as well. Episode 29, Col Mackereth. Col Mackereth was a happy-go-lucky 18-year-old who played footy and was enjoying living on his own for the first time. Then, a split-second decision, a dive into shallow water, changed his life forever. Col has now lived with a spinal injury for 44 years, and he spends his days helping others going through a similar journey. Let's meet him. Col, tell me about yourself. How would you say introduce yourself to a stranger?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't know. I guess I would say the short, bald, good-looking guy, but they kind of already get that because I'm a wheelchair user. I don't know. I'm not that good at selling myself. So let's go to the next question.
Col mightn't be good at selling himself, but that is what I'm here for. And believe me, Col has a beautiful, terrible, wonderful, heartbreaking, heartwarming story to share. It is a roller coaster. But first, let's start at the beginning. Col's teenage years.
Look, I was your typical teenager. Yeah, I just left school. It's funny, when people ask me to describe what it's like to have a spinal injury, it's kind of like when you're that age, you know, you've got a picture in your mind about what your future's going to look like. And I was certainly the same. I knew what I was going to do for work. I knew what I was going to do for sport and recreation. I knew what sort of car I was going to have. I knew where I was going to meet my future wife and where I was going to live. Like it was all really clear in my mind. And then when you have that spinal injury, it's kind of like someone's stolen your future. Someone's taken away your vision, I guess, and it's really hard to see yourself doing anything when every aspect of your life has been, at that time, you think it's been taken away forever. And, you know, that's what our job is now within the peer support program, is helping people that have just had their injuries to get back those pictures in their mind about what their life can look like. I certainly had no idea. I thought my life was over at the time, and it's weird. No one really thinks about, I wonder what it would be like to have a spinal injury. But I actually had, before I had my injury, I had left home, I'd moved away, I started my first job, and I was playing football with a club, and at footy training one day, we were all talking about this young kid. When I say kid, he was probably 19, who'd had a spinal injury from a football tackle. And I remember saying to my mates at training, if that was me, I'd top myself. There's no way I would be able to live with a spinal injury if I was paralysed. And ironically, 2 weeks later, I was in the bed beside him in the spinal unit at the PA hospital in Brisbane, and it's like trying to imagine something that you can't imagine, and until you're there, you just can't imagine what it would be like.
Can you actually take me back to the day of your accident? How much do you remember about that day in the moments leading up to it, even in the moments afterwards?
Look, it is a long time ago, but I used to drink a lot back in those days, and I actually had a big night the night before, and I missed the bus. We were supposed to be going on a football trip to a football carnival. I slept in, missed the bus, and decided to go for a swim to the creek. I dived into shallow water. I can remember floating face down in the water, thinking that I was going to die because all my friends thought I was playing dead, as you do when you're 18. But they got me out of the water, and we didn't think a lot about first aid for spinal injuries back in those days, not the way people are today. So I went back to town in the front seat of a Holden Gemini. Not the best practice for stabilising a fracture. When we got to the hospital, the matron wanted to get the fire brigade and cut the roof off the car. But I was pretty much aware of what was going on. Of course, I was in denial. I didn't think that it was such a serious thing. The fact that I couldn't move anything was a bit of a hint, but I thought that I would have a full recovery, and it wasn't until later that realisation dropped in. I got flown down to Brisbane to the PA hospital. I had head traction. I had skull tongs in my skull with a weight hanging off the end of that for 11 weeks in bed. So I had a lot of time to get my head around what had happened. It's a bit like a grieving process as well. You go through, and I certainly went through that denial about what was going on, how serious it actually was, and then after a while I got to understand what the situation was. By the time I got out of bed, I thought getting in a wheelchair was the best thing ever because it meant I wasn't in bed anymore. I can't relate to how people these days, someone with an injury like mine, they would have a surgery done within a day or two of their injury, and they'd be up and in a wheelchair within a week of having their injury. And it's like, here, welcome to your new life. Here's your wheelchair. Off you go. It's like, no. So it's a lot different to the way things were back in the olden days, my kids call it.
After 11 long weeks in bed, Col began rehab, the first step to beginning his new, very different life.
I did another 6 months in the spinal unit, trying to relearn all the things that I needed to do to be able to be living independently. Again, back in those days, there was no NDIS funding, there was no support for people. And when I discharged from hospital, my options were I would get put in an aged care facility or I'd move back to my parents. So I didn't like either of those. but reluctantly chose to move back with my parents. Mums are beautiful, beautiful creatures. Mum had her baby home, and they're like mother hens. They fluff their feathers up and want to wrap their little babies in cotton wool. And I broke my poor old mum's heart when I said, well, I'm not staying here. I'm not going to be living at home for the rest. None of my mates were living at home. They were back in those days that kids didn't live with their parents till they're 35, like they do these days. It was like, as soon as you can, get a job, get a flat, get a car, get away. So that was my goal, to do that. And I worked on relearning, like I said earlier, relearning how to do things differently. Something as simple as having a shower, cleaning your teeth, getting dressed, all that. I had to relearn how to do all those things. And my level of injury, like I don't have any hand function, I have limited arm function, but I had just enough that I was able to still live independently. So I moved out of home, moved back to Brisbane. I shared a flat with one of the blokes I went through the spinal unit with. Went back to work, went back to pubbing and clubbing 4 nights a week, which is what, again, it was all about doing what everyone else was doing. I got my first car, so I had transport, did some training with sporting wheelies.
Just a note here for everyone who's not in Queensland, Australia, Sporting Wheelies is an organisation for wheelchair athletes. Think Paralympics at state level, which is pretty cool. Col indeed seemed to be coping really well physically, all things considered. But what about mentally? How was your mental state and mindset throughout this whole time? Were you kind of this, like happy-go-lucky, like positive, yes, I can do it, or was there still a sense of like, I don't know, did you go kind of up and down when you realised, your life wasn't quite the same as it used to be?
Look, it was a real roller coaster right from the start. I got heavily into alcohol and substances and all that sort of stuff. And I think it was a combination of trying to use that as a coping mechanism, combined with that's what everyone else was doing as well. So, but one thing that I noticed, and it seems to be quite familiar across the board, is that your self-esteem takes a really big hit. Your self-image takes a really big hit when you're, and again, it comes back to trying to be the same as you were before, and you're not the same person. You're a lot of people say that you're still the same person inside, but I think you are changed inside, because you have to learn to rethink the way you are, the way you feel about yourself. And especially, I know lots of people that are like elite type level athletes really struggle to come to terms with their new situation. I don't know. I really was just preoccupied with getting back to normal and being the same as everyone else and doing the same things as everyone else. Obviously, I was different, and it was super frustrating. I think one of the biggest things I found was the frustration of not being able to do simple tasks. Something when you don't have the use of your hands, something even as simple as clicking your fingers. And when you can't do that, when you can't tie your own shoelaces, things like those little simple tasks that were really easy and now are really complicated and really difficult.
So how did you cope living on your own then, in terms of like the difficulty of those tasks? Like, were there like almost new things you were finding out every day that it's like, oh, can't do that anymore. Can't do that anymore.
You had to, well, you can, but you had to do them differently. You know, like just shoes, for example, had Velcro instead of laces because the little, and, you know, using little aids and equipment to help with your dressing and undressing. But I tended to not want to use many aids and appliances. That for me, it was a lot about the look as well. I wanted my house and stuff to look the same as everyone. I didn't want it to look hospital-y, if that's a new word. And again, lots of people are the same. They want to be normal, if there is such a thing as normal. Or they want to fit in. I certainly wanted to fit in and do the things that everyone else was doing. You know, just even the things that no one wants to do, like doing your laundry, going to the laundromat to do your washing, and that became something that you had to think through. Like you couldn't do things on the spur of the moment as well as you can before. You had to put a bit of thought into, you know, how am I going to go about that? If you're going to a restaurant, you have to think about, okay, is there wheelchair access? Is there going to be an accessible toilet? Am I going to be able to cut the steak up on my own, or I'm going to have to ask someone to help cut my food up? Those sort of things, yeah, took a bit of getting used to. And, yeah, I think being forced to rely on other people a lot is something that I took a long time to come to terms with. I think most of us like to help other people rather than to be helped. And I've managed to flip that around and think, well, if it was me, if the roles were reversed and I was helping someone that needed my help, how would I feel about that? And I would feel good helping. So nowadays when I let someone help me, I feel good that I've allowed them to feel good.
Yeah.
So I don't see it as needing their help. I see it as me helping them to feel good helping me. It's a way of justifying it to yourself, so you don't feel, if you're constantly relying on someone else to do things for you, and you start to think that you're a burden, and you know your self-esteem takes a hit. Like when you start to think that, okay, you're not able to, you're not contributing, it can really get you down. So finding ways to reframe that and think about it differently to allow yourself to have peace of mind works for me anyway.
As well as adjusting to living independently with a new spinal injury, Col was determined to get back to the workforce. And he did. In 1980, just 2 years after his injury, he returned to full-time employment and has been employed every day since then for 42 years.
I went back to work in 1980. I was very lucky in that the job that I had prior to my injury was in the public service. So they worked very hard to get me back to, I couldn't go back to my job that I was doing. I was a cadet draftsman. And back in those days, computers weren't invented yet. So there was no such thing as computer drafting. So it was all done. So I didn't have the dexterity to go back to drafting. But I did go back to work, and I worked in lots of different roles. Within the department, I moved over to the purchasing department, and I was doing purchasing and estimating and that sort of stuff. I've done bookkeeping. I did bookkeeping for a little while. I did maths tutoring, helping kids with their homework. I managed an employment agency for about 10 years. What else have I done? I ran an outdoor education camp for Year 9 Catholic girls. My wife at the time was a teacher, so I put my hand up to take the kids out bush for 5 days and nights.
Gosh, you're a brave man.
I know. It was interesting. But you know what? It's surprising how kids, when they're put in a different element, different kids shine to the ones, in the school environment. There's the kids that do well at school, and there's the kids that do well, with their athletics and their sport. But you take them out bush and get them cooking on an open fire and that sort of thing. Different kids shine out there, which I thought was really good. I was a goat farmer for probably 15 years. I had a small property outside Charters Towers, and I bred and showed goats. Yeah. We used to, one of my good mates used to help me with the goat farming, but we would pack up goats and drive to Sydney every year for the show and take goats to the Sydney Royal Show.
Did you win some ribbons?
Never won a ribbon, ever.
No. Col is the definition of jack of all trades, despite not winning a ribbon at the Sydney Royal. But to me, it seems his most favourite role is the one he's been doing for 17 years now. He's a peer support worker at Spinal Life Australia. But it wasn't a job opportunity that he actually went looking for. It literally fell into his lap.
I was managing the employment agency, and it was an employment agency for people with disabilities. And one day, the Spinal Life Australia's magazine, they were called something different back in those days. The magazine came to work, and I had a look in the classifieds, and there was this job advertised for a peer support officer. And I thought, I'm ready for a change. So I wrote my job application and my resignation letter on the same day and sent them both at the same time.
Col, you're a man of faith.
I know. 2 weeks later, I didn't have a job, and it was, I think, about a month or more before I got offered an interview for this position. So, yeah, it was a bit scary for a little while. But, yeah, the job is really about supporting people in the spinal unit and their families, because it's not just the person that's had the spinal injury whose life is tipped upside down. It's the family as well that, all of a sudden when your partner or your child or your parent has a spinal injury, it affects everybody. It's like, when you throw a stone into a pool, the ripples go out and it affects all those things around you. So we basically have conversations with people about our everyday lives and share the things that we're doing to help people to get a picture about what their life can look like. And, we've had some really, really good feedback when you hear people that have come back into the spinal unit that we supported 10 years ago, and they tell you things like, I remember watching you get your wheelchair out of the car and get out of the car, and that inspired me to go and learn how to drive and to get back to driving. So little things like that, that's why we keep going back all the time. But we support people out in the community as well. It's not just in that acute setting. Some of the things that you go through in life that can be quite complicated if you have a spinal injury, think like going back to work, starting a family, those sort of things can be pretty daunting to anyone. When you have a spinal injury, it's a bit more complex. So we're able to share our lived experience again with those things and tell people how we did it. It's obviously not a one-size-fits-all. The way I did something, you may not do it the same way, but at least you can see that, oh, yes, it's possible. And I might not be able to do it exactly the same way that Col does, but it gives me something to think about. I think, okay, maybe I can do that, and I'll just have to figure out a way to do it.
Apart from having practical conversations with people, Col also talks through the mental hardships of coming to terms with a spinal injury. Everyone is different, but there seems to be a common denominator among most people he talks to. They just don't want to let go of their old life.
That's how people's minds work. You get a vision or an idea or a concept, and then you go about making it happen. Like everything happens in your mind first, and then you go about even something as simple as, I think I might have roast chicken for dinner tonight, and then you go about buying a chicken and going through the process of making that vision a reality. So when someone has that spinal injury initially and they're in that mindset of, I can't do anything, I'll never be able to work again, I'll never be able to drive a car, I'll never have a relationship, I'll never be able to go on that cruise. Our job is to come in and talk to people and share our lived experience about how we have done all those things. And I think the key is that you can still do all the same things, but it will just look different to the way you pictured it. People get caught up in the past. And there's a Bruce Springsteen song that I always think of when I talk about this stuff, Glory Days, and where they're caught up in their old school days and they just want to go back to their old school days. And I think, it's pretty easy for people to get caught up in how things used to be for them, and they can focus on what they've lost rather than what they can still achieve. If you get caught up in focusing on what you haven't got rather than what you can have, that's a really bad mindset to get into. And but between the four of us on the peer support team, we've got over 100 years of lived experience living with a spinal cord injury, and we've done some incredible things amongst us all. Like we've all worked all of our life. I've never been on the disability pension in 44 years. So I pride myself in that I've always earned my own living. And I've done all sorts of weird and wonderful jobs. But we've all had relationships, started relationships since our injury, made a family, drive our own vehicles. One of the guys on our team, Tim McCullum, was a contestant on The Voice a couple of years ago, and he actually sang the national anthem at the AFL Grand Final last year, I think it might have been. So, when you think about what you can achieve, you're really only limited by the way you think about it. And that's our job. When you're first in that spinal unit, you don't think that way, or most people don't. So our job is to help people to change the way they think, I guess.
As if Col wasn't already incredible enough, he's written these pearls of wisdom down in a book. It's called Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow. Tragedy Doesn't Define You. And I asked Col what the takeaway message of the book is.
You can achieve whatever you want if you think about it the right way. It's all, once I learned how to think effectively, that changed my life. People often say to me, having your spinal injury must have been the most profound thing that's ever happened to you in your life. I said, well, no, it's not. When I was first introduced to effective thinking, that's had the most profound effect, certainly on my future, learning how to think in a way that will achieve what you want to achieve. So, yeah, the book is all about is all about helping people to think. It's my story as well, a bit about my story and what I've done, but a lot of it is about learning how to think effectively.
Yeah.
It's more like a self-help than a memoir.
Col, if you could tell people one thing that would increase people's understanding of the disabled community, what would it be?
You know, that someone's disability doesn't really have that much effect on what they're capable of. It's only the way you think about what you're capable of, and the way people in the community make assumptions that you can't do things. And I think if I was to give someone in the community any advice about how they think or how they treat someone with a disability, assume that they can rather than assume that they can't. Because a lot of people won't offer you the opportunity because they assume that you can't do something. They say, oh, I won't ask you to do that job because I don't think you can do it. So why don't you let me work out whether I can do it and you offer me the job, rather than make the assumption that, oh, they won't. And I'm guilty of it myself. I think, I'll ask so-and-so to come over for dinner. Oh, but they're probably busy, so I won't ask them. Ask, then let them make the choice whether they want to do it or not. So I've had friends that say, I didn't ask you to come on the fishing trip because I thought it'd be too much trouble for you. Well, let me figure out how much trouble it's going to be because I really love fishing, rather than make that choice for me. Until you're in the situation, I couldn't imagine what it would be like to have a spinal injury or any disability prior to having one, but then your attitude changes once you're in the situation. I liken it to playing cards. When you get dealt a bad hand, you still want to play, you just have a bad hand to play with. So, you still want to stay in the game, you just have different cards to play with.
All right, Col, final question. I ask this at the end of every episode. How are you different now?
I am able to see myself in a much better way than I could before. I'm a much more positive person now, I think, than I was prior to my injury. I think I was a bit of a loose cannon prior to that, but now I much more happy with who I am since maybe not so much since the injury, but since I've lived with the spinal injury, I've certainly come to terms with who I am as a person.
Thank you so much to Col Mackereth for sharing his story. To find out more about Col's work and his book, you can head to the show notes. I'm Georgia, and thank you for listening to this episode of Finding Hope. I'd love to hear your feedback. You can send me an email, a review, or share it with your friends. Stories are always better when they're shared, and you never know what you can learn from listening to someone else. If you or someone you know has a story of hope to share and you'd like to be interviewed for the podcast, I would also love to hear from you. You can leave a comment on the Finding Hope page at hope1032.com.au. For now, I'll leave you with this verse. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. James 1, verses 2-3. Catch you next time.
This is a Hope 1032 production. Thanks for listening.